Greg.
Go ahead and what?
Well, just introduce ourselves. Okay.
I'm just kidding.
Okay.
Just messing with you. It's been a while. I get to mess with you again.
Yeah. It has been a while.
Hey everybody, welcome back to Addiction, Alcoholism, and the Three Principles. Harry had a great idea to kind of do a little reunion so we could catch up and kind of talk about our experience with doing the show and what we've learned through it and what we've been doing since then. And just kind of catch people up. We've had some people actually asking what we've been up to since we ended the series. So here we are. So how are you doing, Harry? It's been a while.
Yeah, it's great to get together again, Greg. And we had such a strong event or feeling together, and it was a surprise, actually, I think, for both of us, how successful our show was and what an impact it had on other people and on ourselves. And one of the things we both made comments on was, on the earlier shows, as we watched ourselves, we were surprised at how much we had calmed down, how much we had grown, and how much we were sharing on a deeper, wiser perspective as we became more comfortable with ourselves. So the first thing I will tell anyone who is sharing out there in the Three Principles or any community that you're in, it takes some practice, but it's so much fun to share. And in Greg and I's case, the opportunity just fell in our lap, more or less. It's just funny. I heard Greg. I'm going to tell how we started, Greg. I heard Greg on a show with one of the icons, and he asked the question, and she truthfully bullshitted him, and I better watch my language here. And I thought, well, I know the answer to the question. I'll give him the answer and speak to him for 5 minutes, and then hasta la vista, amigo. And so I got his email and contacted him, and he immediately thought I was on the make for money type of thing. I was going to solicit, try to get him to sign on to services. I had the idea that I'd give him a quick answer and that was it, and that would be it. So, and he was the one who introduced us to Zoom. I was against Zoom and thinking only human contact was the way to share the Three Principles. And Greg had just, he was a little more aware of Zoom and so on. So we got together and he told me his spiritual experience he had of being a heavy alcoholic, and then like that, having a deep experience, which I've always enjoyed listening to. Maybe we could also talk a little of that, Greg. And what I experienced was I had a very deep experience on Salt Spring Island with Sydney Banks. And Greg had a very deep spiritual experience in AA. They felt the same. The description of them was totally different. But I immediately resonated with what Greg was talking. I says, I got to work with this guy. This guy's really cool. He's got a deep insight. It's not just that superficial stuff. And we started to talk and enjoy each other. And he says, oh, I have a client. And so we worked on with this client a little bit. And then he says, oh, I have another client. But the big breakthrough happened. Now I'm Zooming with a client in Indianapolis, and she has 2 sons who are heavily alcoholic. And she is feeling terrible. One of them is in prison, and the other one is in the emergency ward every 2 weeks type of thing. And we start talking, and I somehow I relate to her that she's not guilty of anything. It's not her fault. And she starts to cry. And I just get so touched. I say, well, this Zoom is a lot stronger than I thought it was. I thought it had to be just face to face. So after this experience, and immediately when that happened, she started to cry. Says, I've got to talk to Greg and maybe we should do a show together. So I phone him up Friday evening. And he says, yeah, great idea. And I said, well, what do we call it? He comes up with addiction, alcoholism, and the three principles. I didn't even know, to be honest, that alcoholism and addiction are two separate areas, let alone, and then I say, well, where will we do it? He says, well, I know a free Zoom room. I said, oh, this is right up my alley, free and Zoom. And then he says, let's do it Sunday. And I go, Sunday? It's just Friday evening and we're doing it Sunday. And Greg had all of this network that 3P is, he was really involved in that then. And he put out the word. And I was kind of also poo-pooing the 3P community. And we showed up on Sunday and we had 25 to 30 people. And the show was amazing. We just had a strong connection together. People really wanted to hear about this subject, and they wanted to hear about it in a way that wasn't being shared in the 3P community up to that point. And we were original, we were different. And so we did the first show, and then we noticed the after show views had a couple hundred people. We all of a sudden, we say, wow, the after show is even more impressive than the during the show type of thing. And then before long, we invited, our first guest was Aaron Turner, and that's what created. And the show kept evolving, and we kept keep having the same idea. Free has to be not fixing the problem, discussing things from a spiritual, psychological perspective. And we had to be ourselves. We could not copy or do things. And I didn't want the show to be guest driven. I wanted the show to be subject matter driven, where we were going to talk about topics that were of interest to the people. And so we started. And the first show, one guy shows up and he says, after the first show, gee, I quit smoking. We never talked about smoking. And I said, wow, even if it helps someone like that, that's fantastic. And so we started.
I forgot about that guy.
Yeah, yeah.
that was pretty incredible. We didn't expect that at all.
No.
For the first show, it was an incredible experience to have him show back up for the next one and share that.
Yeah, yeah.
And what was really actually very interesting was when you came up with the idea for the Golden Moment series. So then we started going back through the older videos and rewatching them to find what we wanted to include in the Golden Moments.
Yeah.
And to go back to those first few videos and watch those, like you said earlier, just to see the amount of growth that we've experienced and the depth of our understanding that came in just by going through this process and exploring this subject. And it's not, when I named it, it's not that alcoholism and addiction are separate things, it's that people think of them separately. So I wanted to just have that appeal to both crowds, because when you come from like the 12-step programs separate everything. You have AA for alcoholics, then you have all the other programs for narcotics and all the other different things. So they've separated stuff. So the whole idea was just to kind of meet people at that level and say, yeah, we're dealing with alcoholism and addiction here, even though they're the same thing. It's the habitual thought pattern. That's all it really is. You create a new pattern to replace it, and next thing you know, it's gone. It's really
maybe you could talk before you go into. I'd like to hear what you experienced originally when you were in there, because I always felt it was the cornerstone of everything we did, to be honest. But one of the things I wanted to emphasize to the people who are listening to this is when you're earlier on in doing the show, you're doing a lot of thinking how the show is going. That drops away. But I had a prejudice or a belief that I was the higher person. And we went back to the golden moments, and I had to listen to Greg. And I went, oh, this is good stuff. Oh, when you took away your concept of what the show was, what was happening on the show, and just looked at it objectively, everything changed for me with Greg after that, because I recognized his wisdom. It was so beautiful. I was painting, Greg, you, no matter what you were saying, from a belief. And then I heard what you were saying, and I said, oh, this is beautiful stuff. This is educational. This is taking people. And you were coming from such a beautiful space. So I changed. It changed me. And our shows after that, we became comrades rather than interesting co-hosts, but not actually, we always worked together, but with that ego thought, my ego thought, it colored, tainted the relationship type of thing. And so I just wanted to mention that was the best, when we did the Golden Moments course, that course really was fun to do, and it was a creative process, but the best result was I changed, and about Greg and the wisdom he has and the relevance to him teaching me about this subject. That was really fun. Then you became lots of fun for me, because I didn't know that much about it, to be honest, and you did. And you were the subject matter expert and had the spiritual insight. So maybe you could, for a second, talk a little bit about what you experienced in that moment, because I felt it was the cornerstone to everything that we grew into and shared with people.
Okay. So let's tell the short version.
Yeah, the short version, yeah.
Yeah, I ended up in AA in 2012. It was June of 2012. And I immediately felt this great sense of relief, just kind of being a part of a community like that. You know, anytime you feel really connected with other people, it lifts your spirits. You know, we need each other. We are still animals, and we've forgotten that, but we still have animal needs, you know, to socialize and be outside and be in the sun and whatnot. But so my initial experience was really great, because suddenly I had some hope. I'd been wanting to change things for a lot of years, but didn't know how. You know, didn't really know that there was much of an option out there. And I even though a couple of people over the years had mentioned AA, it just never sat in my mind as something that existed. You know, it was like just this concept of something out there somewhere, maybe. But something happened, you know, very, very quickly. I began to recognize that a lot of the people who had a lot of years sober were not really very happy. And I started wondering why. I started paying attention to little things and talking to people and finding out, you know, finding those people who were truly happy and asking them, what are you doing? You know, why are you so happy? And one of the people I talked to ended up recommending that I read Emmett Fox's book, The Sermon on the Mount, which takes a metaphysical view of the Sermon on the Mount, you know, Jesus's sermon. And that was my first real introduction to the idea that thought held any kind of power over us, or not over us, but thought has power, that there's something to it. And it really started opening my mind to a lot of different ideas and possibilities. And and eventually led to me actually feel very, very honored to have been a part of a study group at an Israeli man's house for a few years, where we first of all they were going over the Sermon on the Mount at the same time I was reading it, which is how we ended up connecting. And then we got into other books and talking about more traditional, like Hasidic Jewish teachings, and it was just this really fascinating time for me. But that was, I kind of got ahead a little bit on that because of the years of hanging out there. But when I first started going there was shortly before Thanksgiving Day, which is November 25th for people who don't celebrate it, but of 2012. So I was exactly 5 months sober, and I went to a gathering for AA. It was just a gratitude meeting. They do this every Thanksgiving. They would rent out a school gymnasium, and there were a couple hundred people there, and everybody get 30 seconds to say what they're grateful for. And it was, well over an hour of just hearing all of this beautiful, beautiful stuff that people were sharing, and the energy in the room was just palpable. I mean, gratitude is just such a powerful force. And at the end, when we all went to join hands to say a prayer, I was no longer in my body. I was no longer in physical form. And I saw the energy behind life. I saw that there was no difference between the energy that makes me and the energy that makes the chairs that were in the room, and the air in between me and the other people, and the walls and all that stuff was all the exact same energy, just kind of vibrating at different frequencies, so that it manifested in that form. But at the core of it, it's still that energy bouncing around. We still actually contain more air, more space than we do solid matter, and yet we feel solid. It feels like we are solid, but inside we're moving. We're constantly in motion. This energy just flows through everything in the universe, and it is all one. It is only our beliefs as humans, and especially when we develop science and stuff like that, that's when we started separating everything. And we had to go, we have feet, but these other animals have paws. We started separating ourselves from nature, from our true being, from who and what we are. And I really feel like that's what has caused all of our issues as humans. All of the pain and suffering that we experience is because of this illusion of separation. When the fact of the matter is, there is no separation. That's why Zoom works. That's why you can get on here. I mean, I've been in tears with people on here during coaching sessions, just watching their face light up and relax. You start talking to them and they're all scrunched up and tense, and then suddenly they relax. They kind of get that like far off stare, and then their eyes light up. And it's like something like that connection, that energy that we have between each other. It's such an intense feeling when you open up to it. And I was amazed too, the first time I used Zoom and really connected with somebody, on the other side of the world. My first Zoom chat was with somebody in Australia, literally a day ahead, but it felt like we were sitting in the same room somehow. It felt like I almost, honestly, when I'm sitting talking to people, I almost feel like I should be offering them refreshments or something. Like they're sitting in my living room, and it's time to offer them a drink or a snack or something. And it's this energy behind life is just, it's beyond words, it's beyond description. Just like the three principles. You can experience this, but you really can't understand it. You can memorize some words that kind of point to it, but there are no words that truly actually describe the principles, which are really one anyway. Once again, we're dividing things, but everything is one. There's that oneness, and the oneness is love. And I absolutely believe that we all love each other. At our core, we are love. So we love each other, except that we create these ideas of, oh, that person looks a certain way, so I shouldn't talk to them. Or, we just have these preferences and biases that we don't even know that we have. Because if we aren't feeling love for another person, then we're caught up in our ego.
And that's one of the interesting things, Greg, with this subject that I have seen. It's not a serious subject. It's really just another scenario that people have created for themselves. That the healing isn't what you're pointing towards. And once that's experienced, they're on their way. They might get it all at one time or in pieces, but they're on their way with the understanding that the spiritual feeling, the feeling of love between us as one, is actually, I call it the us mind, is the healing. Not what we started to see was, it wasn't actually us, it was the energy in the room reached a certain point where there was healing being offered. And that us mind, when it's experienced, you don't need any details with it. You don't have to add anything more. It's the healing. And it heals, like in our first show, we never talked about smoking, but it healed that person in smoking. It works, that's all we do. And when Greg, who goes into nature a lot now, does a lot of, that's all he's experiencing is the us mind, that space, and he gets healed. Well, he's actually just opening up to the healing energy of being in the now, the feeling of, it's not really that difficult to see. It's actually relatively simple to help people if you don't get into thoughts about what you're supposed to do with addiction or suffering or whatever it is that the person had. Because I think I'm correct, Ray, in saying you did have a spontaneous instant experience that did transform your life relatively quickly. Is that correct?
Yeah, I guess I forgot to share that part. So after I had that experience, I no longer felt that need to escape. And that's when things got extra interesting, because I'm in AA, which is supposed to be the only way to recover from a non-recoverable disease, in their view. And I feel like I'm cured. I feel like it's no longer an issue. And I hadn't worked the steps yet, and I didn't have a sponsor, and I hadn't done those things that you're supposed to have to do in order to have an experience. And so unfortunately, a lot of the feedback that I got was not supportive of my experience. I was actually warned that it may be dangerous and end up killing me, because I was too new to sobriety and I hadn't worked the steps, and I hadn't jumped through all the hoops that they claim you have to jump through. And even though I spent another 3 years or so in AA, I spent it with more of an inquisitive mind, looking for the truth in AA. Where did it start? where, not only where did it start, but where did things kind of change? Because in the beginning, when Bill Wilson was around, and for those of you who don't know, Bill Wilson had an incredible experience himself, which is when he got sober. And everything after that point was his best effort at helping other people to have the same experience he had. So when he came up with the steps, which by the way, in the big book are the only thing that's suggested, what is required is honesty, open-mindedness, and willingness. Steps are only suggested. Bill Wilson was really big on what he called healthy experimentation. That's why AA groups are autonomous, which means they can run their meeting. Well, they're supposed to be able to run their meeting however they want to, even if they don't agree with any of the ideals of AA. They can run it however they want to. And the idea behind that was that Bill Wilson said that one of two things is going to happen. Either they're going to fail and probably end up adopting AA's principles anyway, or they'll succeed. And then AA should adopt their principles. He didn't want people to be stuck on the steps. He wanted the program to evolve. And unfortunately, it hasn't. It's very stuck. It's a beautiful community. There's so much support there. I mean, it's one of the largest communities in the world, if not the largest. But it could be so much more effective. You know, it just opening up to the possibility that there's another way to look at things. That maybe addiction is not a disease. Maybe addiction is something different. Maybe it is curable. Maybe it's simpler than you think. Maybe it's just a simple matter of coming up with a new way of living, of viewing life, of viewing the way that things just operate. It's not about having an understanding of these principles. It is about having an experience of the principles. And you're experiencing them in every moment. You just don't realize it. That's the kicker. They're always working. Whether you're having a miserable experience or the most wonderful experience you ever had, still working. Still doing what they do. They're impersonal. They just amplify what you're thinking. Plain and simple. What we think and what we hold in our thoughts on a consistent basis becomes our reality. There is no other way to experience life. And having a three principles understanding doesn't change that. It just means that now you don't have to take it so seriously. There's a certain lightness to it, you know.
It's bulletproof. Your feelings. Oh, I'm heading in the wrong direction, and you intuitively, not intellectually, not reading a book about what you should do. You just intuitively head in the right direction. Oh, I found a good feeling again. Eventually, sometimes right away, and sometimes a little longer, but it's there. The good feeling is always there, and that's the bottom line. It saves a lot of trouble trying to find the good feeling when you know the good feeling is just, if the three principles are a truth and they point us in the right direction to that truth, that's the honesty that Bill Wilson is talking about. He's right. You have to be honest. You can't pretend to yourself with your impure thoughts that I feel okay when you don't. On the other hand, you don't have to feel bad for a very long period of time because it's uncomfortable. It's not really where I like being. I don't like hanging out there. Now, Greg, one of the things that you mentioned to me early in the story was you had this experience, but you didn't have the words to describe it. And then the three principles came along, and then all of a sudden you had a language to describe your spiritual insight uh, that you could then share, because obviously there was a shift for you when you had your spiritual experience before the principles, which is very interesting to me, before the principles. And then the principles came in, you were introduced to the principles, and that also resonated with you as truth or a fact, or what I like to call a rock, something you could hold on to. How did that kind of work?
Well, once again, the words thing. Just words are so inadequate. It's very difficult sometimes to try to choose the right ones, because they never do point at it. They never do quite do it. So I had been in AA for a little over 3 years at this point, and I'd started going to a Unity church because I was kind of interested in that kind of metaphysical view of the Bible and the healing and all that kind of stuff. And one Sunday, I look at the church bulletin, and it says new meeting, 3 principles. It didn't even really explain what it was, but I felt drawn to it. And you've seen, if you've watched any of the shows, you've probably seen Bob Shell and Marty Cashel on some of the shows.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
they're the ones that run the meeting.
A charming couple, by the way. Very charming.
Love those two. And Bob just like pulls me aside and just kind of he's so excited to share it. He dumps all this information on me about the 3 principles and how, just it was a lot, but it felt so right. And I know everybody knows what I'm talking about when I say that. I don't have to explain to you what intuition feels like, what an insight feels like. Everybody's had them. Everybody will continue to have them. We just maybe don't always pay attention to them. But it opened up a lot of things for me, because first of all, I had an option other than AA. And it honestly just never even occurred to me that there might be another option. And that was life-changing right there, just to know that, maybe how I was feeling for the last like 3 years wasn't really wrong. It was just misunderstood and misplaced. So it wasn't too long after that, maybe within a week or so, I ended up finding Joe Bailey's book, The Serenity Principle, which talks about basically, 3P and AA, and the 3P view of why AA works when it works and why it doesn't when it doesn't. And reading that book, I'm like, this man is in my head. I finally found in writing what I'd been trying to to express for years. And it brought a lot of peace and serenity into my life. Just knowing that I wasn't crazy. I wasn't the only one who saw things that way, that other people understood how I was feeling and thinking. And that was really the beginning of the ultimate journey of my life, which kind of leads me up to now, where I'm doing crazy things. Like this weekend, I'm going to go backpacking, and Friday night it's going to be negative, well, it keeps changing, either -5 or -10 degrees Fahrenheit. It's going to be cold, but I'm looking forward to it. Because you know what happens in the cold in the winter? Silence. absolute complete silence. I'll be in the middle of the Allegheny National Forest in the northwestern part of Pennsylvania, and there aren't any roads anywhere near where I go, and there won't be any people because it's cold and snowy. It's just, it is such an amazing experience. I went out there a couple of weeks ago too. And just the feeling of when you get out in nature and truly just connect. I'm not talking about when you go walking with your friend from work that you like to complain about other people with. That doesn't really count. You're not actually in nature. You're not being a part of nature. You are walking through it, but you're not within it. You're still in your head and stuck in your thinking. Spend some time alone in nature. It doesn't have to be on a frigid night in the middle of the woods. Just go somewhere alone, a local park, somewhere where you can find a quiet spot. And spend some time just observing. You don't have to do anything special, nothing in particular, just observe. Watch the animals that are around. Look at all the different trees and the plants, and just what do things smell like? What are the sounds that you're hearing? But one of the key things is not to judge any of it. That's going to be the hardest part. Not to say that anything is more beautiful than anything else. Not to say that something smells better than something else. But just to observe it as it is and love it as it is, accept it as it is. Which is much easier to do with a tree than it is another person. Although it's the same thing. They're both living, breathing creatures. And they both communicate. Everything communicates. That energy, it's flowing. And we are all part of it. And we all have access to that wisdom of the ages at any moment. And you don't have to have a major experience to have major changes in your life. In fact, I mean, yeah, that first experience was pretty major for me. But honestly, in the grand scheme of things at this point, it's really kind of small compared to my overall experience and how much things have changed. And the vast majority of those are what I like to call popcorn insights, just the little ones that pop up here and there. And you don't even necessarily notice them until suddenly there's that bowl of popcorn, Suddenly you've got all these tiny little insights together, and you wake up one day and you go, holy crap. Like I used to have this bad habit and I haven't done it for 6 months. What happened?
See, that's the silence, Greg. It's interesting to, when you talk about that feeling, the feeling that Greg is expressing is connection to nature. It's his nature that he's connecting to. It's true that the tree has energy. It's an indigenous feeling, and we're all indigenous to spirit. So it's not indigenous like you have to have a feather in your head type of thing. We're all, whenever we touch this silence, this quiet, what happens is you start to notice your level of consciousness rises because your mind is quieted down. And you start to experience what Greg talks about. When did I change? I wasn't working on myself. I just suddenly liked being in a quieter, more peaceful, content way. And that's what happened to me too, Greg. Before we got together for 4 years, I just said, nothing is working in my life. I'm just going to be content. I just simplified everything. I just gave up everything. I didn't have any money. I didn't have anything. And I just got content with my son and what life brought me, going to the ocean like you're talking about and appreciating every little thing that came into my life. And I couldn't believe it. I lost so many desires. I didn't realize that I was a follower of my desires. like what the world had taught me to be. And as I reached a certain stage of contentment, I had a sacred moment where I talked to God and I said to God, now this is a little different than perhaps some of you understand, but I basically said, you know, I'm really, really happy. I couldn't, life is so easy. It's just a piece of cake. But I'm getting actually a little bored. It's so easy that there's nothing happening. And I like that, but I wouldn't mind a little more. And the next morning, boom, I get this phone call, 9 a.m. I wake up, 9:01, the phone ring. Harry, I work in this addictions recovery center in the worst area in Vancouver, which has a huge homeless, huge drug and alcohol addiction scenario. And he says, I got a very small little project. Can you take it over? I've been offered another job. And I go, ooh, I hate addiction. If there's one area that I was the lousy, I wasn't good at anything, but I wasn't good. Addiction was the worst. Yuck. And I didn't want to do it. But I had just had this little chit chat with God or with my true nature of mind. And so I said, I'll give it a try. I didn't realize I had changed. The reason I was unsuccessful, Greg, was I was always trying to fix them. I was always trying to help them with some good common sense advice. I was talking about their problem. All of a sudden, I saw them as beautiful people. And when I brought up spirituality, wow, these people really know a lot about spirituality. They've suffered. They're looking for answers. They're not interested in the same old garbly goop that everybody else is talking about. They like the freshness of a new idea. They liked that life is spiritual, and they liked sharing what they knew, not just listening to what I knew. And I left there, I was on a cloud, like a cloud. I said, this is the most fun I've had in years. This is fabulous. My worst area, and I love it. And that's when I wasn't like you, Greg. I didn't know really anything about that area, except that I hated it, to teach it or to be involved in it. And so it was God, or whatever you want to use, that spirit brought us together. Greg was the subject matter expert with a spiritual experience. I had been with Sydney Banks and had a spiritual concept of teaching. We came together, and together we were a unit. He knew about the subject, and he knew about spirit. I was a big mouth who had bad jokes and knew some about the spirit too, and some stories about Sid Banks. Worked out perfect. And we grew together. We just simply grew together. The show literally was our teacher. Like it just changed us. And how about the prep, Greg? Because we really did a lot of prep, right?
There was so much planning involved.
Yeah.
It was the very last show was the only one that had any kind of planning. And I said, Harry, why are you starting this now?
Yeah, I did it because of the guests coming on. I did it. But Greg and I, the only prep we never did any prep, but every once in a while I would say, gee, this is a touchy topic or an interesting topic. And I would phone Greg up and say, Greg, or I'd say, do you want to talk about the show? He says, no, I'm okay. I said, he says, how are you? I said, I'm okay. Okay, there's our prep. That was it. That was the maximum prep we did. Generally speaking, there was no prep. And
a lot of the topics actually came from the shows.
Yeah.
When people would come on and somebody would make a comment, they'd ask about something, then we're like, well, let's just do a show on it.
Yeah, that's it.
Let's talk about it. Let's explore it. Because the fact of the matter is, neither of us was any kind of, expert at any of it.
No, you can't.
We were both just kind of getting going, and just it was a way of exploring it, because that's really, to me, that's what this series really captured, was just this exploration of this subject matter that, quite honestly, most people are afraid to talk about. because there are such firm beliefs around it being a disease and not being curable.
Or from the 3P perspective, thought, 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 thought.
Right. So that was to me the best part about it, was the exploration, the learning, and it wasn't just you and I learning and growing together. We had this whole community. You know, all these people, all those, the after show views, you know, the views on YouTube, and then eventually the podcast series, and even to this day, there's still a tremendous amount of viewership of the series, and I'm still connecting with people, and people are getting a hold of me for coaching, and it's such a beautiful thing. I had no idea when we started that first of all, that it would last more than one time, or that it would have the kind of impact that it's had. And I really think it had that kind of impact because we were open. We didn't have any kind of ideas of it needs to go this direction. We just started talking. That's really what it was.
Yeah.
You know, we decided that Friday, that Sunday we were going to start, and we started. And
Yeah.
then we just kept talking, and people kept listening, and other people spoke with us. And it was nice to have the guests, but it was also really nice to just have the group conversations.
That's an important point that I want to make for people in 3 Principles. It's not the guests, it's the level of consciousness of the show. Some of our best shows had the lowest viewership. The deepest shows often were the ones that people have to see that if it's guest driven, then what happens is Greg and I become introducers. We become Ed Sullivan. We introduce an act, they're fantastic, and then we leave, and the act gets all the credit. But Greg and I understood that people wanted to contribute, to talk, to share ideas, and we were going to have no restrictions in that. Like you couldn't just talk like this or that, and you couldn't sugarcoat it. Greg and I were not into sugarcoating the 3 Principles and its contribution in different areas. We were genuinely looking for a deeper answer, a more profound answer to addiction. And people could feel that genuineness coming from us. And they could also feel that actually we headed the people into new directions. And for me, Greg, it really happened when I got the idea that I was missing a point. And the point was, you already had this point, but I was missing it. What's on their mind? We're talking about the Sydney Banks and the 3 Principles, but what's on their mind? What's the questions on their mind? And that thought personified everything I started to do. What's on their mind? If I can see what's on their mind, I can answer that question for them, perhaps. Or we could get to a place where the answer would reveal within themselves the answer that they were looking for. And that educational component, really, for me as an educator, that was something that I was always centered on. I was actually designing curriculum in a digital format rather than on a piece of paper. And I was connecting things together. And I was always curious. And remember when we would chit chat and you would come up with topics for things because you had a much clearer idea what was on their mind. And we would make that a topic. Those shows always spurred helping one person. That was the goal we had. If it helps one person, the show's a success. And those shows helped people, helped them in a way that like, it's one thing to help yourself, but to see another person being helped. Greg never lost that feeling of helping, that feeling of free, that feeling of honesty, that feeling of it doesn't matter what 3P is doing. We have to uncover the truth of this particular situation. And as we delved into that, we got clearer and clearer that this evolution surprisingly was one of the best things we were doing every 2 weeks in our life. Like, I mean, it was amazing. 80 shows, 3¼ years, every 2 weeks or twice a month. And it was effortless. It was simply the best thing that God could have given us to do. Like, it changed our lives forever. I just say, thank you, God. That's all I have to say. Changed our lives forever. I'm never the same after that. And Greg wasn't either. And here we are getting together for, a chit chat. I think this is part 1, Greg. I think it's good right here. And we'll get together next week and we'll continue a little bit more into part 2 and what we've been doing and so on, a little bit more stuff. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, that sounds good to me.
Okay, I'll just stop the recording and we'll get together next week.